There's plenty of questions from the audience, and may I request Dr. Shantan Kandra if he can extend this until 12:30, at least the Zoom session, just in case it spills over a bit. We have we have Professor Vidyanand Jha in the audience who says, "Can the subaltern speak? And would you allow me?" So. I'm going to take a couple of questions from those who have expressed earlier. So let me quickly go to them, and definitely we are coming to you, Professor Jha. There was a comment from Professor Anil Maheshwari, but I don't think he's here in the session. So some others had liked his comment and agreed with him. So Sukanya, would you like to speak about that or your question?
No, ma'am, I'm actually outside, so
okay. Nitesh, you had some comments. Would you like to explain them?
Yes, thank you, Professor Ramya. I just wanted to understand, like, so if you're trying to study, these texts, and I've heard, in previous talks as well, that a lot of the meaning is lost in translation. So I was just wondering if we are looking to kind of look at these ancient texts, how can we go about it? Do we have to like learn a new language? And if so, what would be a good language to gain proficiency in? Was I clear?
Learn Tamil.
Yeah, I would think that you may be mostly benefited by knowledge of Sanskrit, because a vast amount of this repository is primarily available in Sanskrit, and other languages sort of added a little more to it and so on. That's my understanding of the whole thing. So therefore, I think you must learn Sanskrit, and learning Sanskrit is not at all difficult. If you are an Indian, you know half of Sanskrit anyway. Even in Tamil, somebody said Tamil, I am a Tamilian, and Karunanidhi made one statement, and I pointed that every word he used was actually Sanskrit. He said Sanskrit is Savapatti pottu Ani Adipom. All words are Sanskrit actually. Sava is Sanskrit, Peti is Sanskrit, Ani is Sanskrit, everything is Sanskrit. So therefore, there are many ways to even learn Sanskrit today, and you would be hugely benefited by that.
Yeah,
thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Professor Ken Nishikawa from Kone University in Japan. Would you like to ask your question or comment?
Okay, I'm just writing at my impression on chat. So basically, so coming from some ideas coming from our conversation, but basically, so as a Japanese researcher and teachers, as a member of Asian regions, and even sometimes I join webinar and seminar run by the westernized researchers, educators, but a whole bunch of expression or experiences through those webinar seminar. I think one of the things we need to right now is increase our curiosity neighbors. So from Japan, so Korean, China, Indonesia, Philippines, and Myanmar, and so India. So the curiosity to apply to solve a problem in Japan, then that's a meaningful curiosity to learn. And also, when I apply all wisdom and knowledge and tools to Japanese situation, and some of those ideas can help our society improve. And so then I will return or application or case study to neighbors as a feedback or a gratitude to your wisdom, history, or knowledge. That's my impression. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any comments from any of the panelists on that? Otherwise, we could.
I see some hands in the.
Yes.
Yeah, Jitesh ji has hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Jitesh.
Yeah, am I audible? Yeah, Jitesh just said, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
So somehow my video is not working. Apologies for that. My question is to Nidhi. When we talk about theorizing about the indigenous, another question that comes to mind is whom are we theorizing for? Right. So are we because what I've realized in my work, so I just to brief you about my work. So I work on indigenous entrepreneurship. My thesis dealt with Marwari business community. I met Nidhi in EGOS at Edinburgh. And recently published a paper in organization day before, last year. So the issue that we face is that when we are writing about the indigenous and theorizing about management practices, are we, if we go and attack or get in confrontation with the West, saying, or if we claim in our papers or in our writings that, this is an alternative, but it's not so in my opinion, is it an alternative to the West? Because West has its own trajectories, its own history, and places like India has its own history and trajectories. So what I'm theorizing about may fit only into my context. And if I claim universality, I'm falling the same trap, or can be alleged to be again colonizing in another way, personally.
Jitesh, thank you. I believe I met you in Edinburgh. I remember you. I'm very happy to hear from you. We don't have a whole amount of time, so I'll keep this reasonably short. And of course, we can exchange emails later. There's nothing about management that is universal. Management is entirely contextual. So most of what, for instance, Professor Oja has been speaking of is better characterized not as Western management, but really as, if you wish, corporate capitalism. And I would actually argue a lot of those features of corporate capitalism are not just unique to companies in the United States, but also some companies in India. The issue of it's too easy to pick on the West. If we're going to pick on the West, let's do it properly. I mean, let's face it, the United States is destroying the world through global warming. It has the largest stockpile of weapons and is fighting supporting a useless war with Ukraine and supporting the state of Israel as it continues to oppress the Palestinians, while also maintaining a race war with the African Americans in this country. Those are reasons to criticize the United States. That apart, it's a bit of a cop-out to actually criticize the West. We're all Western, for God's sake. We're all speaking English, aren't we? We're in India. Last time I checked, is India really not part of the West? Excuse me, we're using Zoom, aren't we? I think it's a little facetious to pick on the West in those ways. So Jitesh, I appreciate your comment. Very briefly, my response would be this. It is better to look at contexts, including within the West, and critique them. It is worth asking, for instance, what aspects of Wall Street work in Bombay and what aspects don't. What aspects of Dalal Street work in New York City and don't. Those are worth asking. What are aspects of Marwari entrepreneurship in India that can be considered when we look at Marwadis who work in South Africa and in parts of Japan? Those are worth asking. But once we go past the context, I think it is very, very hard indeed in the world we live in today to sort of argue that there is something uniquely Western and something uniquely non-Western. And if I may say so, especially in the context of what we're speaking of. Let me also briefly here, we may not have time later, respond to what Professor Mahadevan raised. What is the purpose, if we would argue that, of arguing that indigenous management should speak for everyone? Well, so that we actually get things done. I mean, take India, for instance. We have spent a lot of time trying to argue that there's a certain version of management in India that functions, but it's a deeply exclusionary one. But to create a more inclusive form of management, I think we will have to speak to a variety of Indians, including, if I may point it out, Indians who don't necessarily rely on Sanskrit or on Tamil or on even Hindi. In a variety of languages, in a variety of traditions, we will have to hear them and ask, what is it about management you care about? And how would we respond to that? That to me is really what is at issue. Otherwise, it's not really credible to argue for a management that is either Indian or indigenous.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Nidhi. Yeah. We'll continue this over email. Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Vidyanand Jha would like to make some quick comments.
I think quick is the key. So let me just begin by taking a pot shot at Abhay and others. I studied in an Indian school in Indian way, actually. So whatever I'm going to say, my standpoints are very clear. It's not American education in Indian school or whatever Western education in Indian school. Some part of what I'm going to say is not new to me, actually. At least there are some people in the audience who have heard me say similar things actually at Pune. They had a similar conference on Indian management. I think some of the people I met also there, like Professor Mahadevan and so on, they had promised to put these things on video, YouTube. Hopefully, if they do that, these ideas remain in the public domain. Let me just raise 2-3 issues which at some level are close to what Nidhi was saying, but some level they are also different. One issue which I would like to just express my amusement with actually is this fascination with religious texts, which are the residues, and trying to wish away lived human experience of 5,100 years, if not more. Harappa now goes to 10,000 years. So somehow we want to wish away all these lived human experience. Somehow we want to be ahistorical. That is something I find deeply amusing, and I would not kind of people kind of expand this argument. I think in the essence you understand this argument which I'm making. Reworking of this argument could be that why not go to the work of Jyotiba Phule? Why not go to the work of Sant Ravidas, for example? Okay, so and I can multiply these names ad infinitum. Second thing for me, Ben's talk was actually very neat talk actually, because this was a non-Indian setting trying to grapple with their issues, and I could see some insights for myself. Along with the insights, I also had some questions. In fact, 2 questions which I have, that despite world over this yearning for respective indigenous managements, why does universal management practices or theory survives? That is one question. And to me, if I look at it conceptually, the idea is that even this idea of Indian, for example, most of the days, most of the time, I don't feel Indian. I feel Maithil. So basically, where do I draw a line? If I go to Mithila, there are again people who say that people who in Saharsa who speak, they speak very differently than. So in this whole continuum of, actually categorizations, where do we say that one is valid and the other is not? That is a conceptual issue for me. Second is this issue which Ben also had and even we have. What is the nature of preponderance of the current practices? Obviously, it has to be seen in the current reality, and we can't leave economics from the part of it. So why Filipino managers do not practice traditional Filipino society-oriented kind of management practices? To me, the answer may be in the economic systems which Philippines follows in this system. So somewhere this whole idea that we are, and I have said this before, I think just to partially provoke, but also partially kind of, I find management scholars, and their fascination with Sanskrit, with their half-baked knowledge of Sanskrit. Oh my God, I found it. This is what I actually often find actually. And I would say not only Sanskrit, be a better Sanskrit scholar, be a better, Farsi scholar, because in India, if you want to know what happened to India during 300, 400 years, you need to know what, the knowledge of Parsi. So this was just a comment. This was not a question. This is a viewpoint. In our times, it exists. And the viewpoint which this panel is just trying to propagate, that's not the only viewpoint. I just wanted to register my presence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Jha. I think Chandan, I think you had some comments in the chat as well as you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am. It's a very great conversation and the discussion by all the eminent personalities. I am a faculty of management and I'm teaching ethics also. My question is, sir, a lot of indigenous methodologies and the mythological stories and the historical evidences we have got now. And we are trying to apply these as it is in sometimes the situations as and when arise. But my question is, the theories which we generally take into consideration, like Kantian theory, utilitarian, and the different perspectives, of course, from the Socratic and from different peripheries of the worlds around. So how we can apply that? Like, it is a great question on the management decision, how would we combine and take a right decision? And rather than just depending and leaving it onto the situation, like, okay, some next better opportunity comes later, and then again we will change it and mold it accordingly. But I'm really trying to figure out the right ways to take a nice ethical decisions. So yeah, please, your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Oh, anybody wants to respond?
Professor Rajen Gupta has his hand up, so.
Yeah, okay. Maybe Chandan, I will respond. I don't teach ethics, but I will come from the idea that I don't believe in the concept of universal ethics. Okay. We should not shut ourselves to the rest of the world, but our ethics should be grounded in the value systems that people who are being affected by those decisions think about. And it's not shut ourselves to what Socrates had thought or whatever else people had thought about, but learn from them. And to the extent that you can anchor in your own tradition, and if as society has evolved and as sort of the economic system is evolving and you need to adjust it based on learning from the rest of the world, please do it. Okay. So like I kind of said in my session the last time we met, when Indians borrow from Japan and Indians borrow from China, we're very conscious that we are borrowing Chinese management system or Japanese management system. When we borrow from the West, we think it's universal. That's, for me, that's the biggest tragedy. So it's not about shutting out the West, knowing that you are your society, the people who are getting affected, it should make sense to them. And to the extent you should start with your indigenous understanding of what is right and what is wrong. To the extent that it runs into problems, you might borrow from thinking elsewhere in the world. Okay, my grouse with Indian scholars is when they take from the West, they think it's universal. But when we borrow from something Indian, we'll say Hindu or we'll say Buddhist or we'll say whatever. Just kind of go grounded, start with whatever. So if you happen to be in Bangladesh, rely on a Bangladeshi ethos. If you can learn from something from India, if you can learn from something from Britain or Japan, please use it. But the tragedy is most of us people who have been colonized, and some of I will take objections to what Vidyanand said. I mean, it's not about East versus West. It's about the acceptance of West as universal and anything else as periphery. So my thing is not to throw out the West, just to, I came from, okay, Nidhi also went to a Canadian school. An average Canadian is very worried about this big brother pushing his idea onto Canada. Okay, so it's not that the West is monolithic. I speak to European scholars who are raising the same issues because this American management is forcing them to do things that they would not otherwise do. So for our context, we are putting this West as big. But even within Europe, there is a lot of pushback against what we'd call Western management. Okay, so I'll stop there.
I'll quickly add that this search for universalism has been questioned by cross-cultural psychologists and cross-cultural researchers for at least 50 years, documented, going strong. And so I sometimes, and since I came from that training background, I find myself easier to not fall into the trap of accepting the universal idea. And Hofstadter's work clearly questions the universal. And basically in management literature, if we leave the the international management's contribution, then we'll talk about universalism. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, next I will take Professor, I'll take Anupama's comment, and then I will request Professor Jyoti Bachani, who has some very good points in the chat, to please explain her comments. So Anupama?
Yeah, so thank you very much, professors, for your wonderful talk so far. I have a question to Professor Ojha. So, Professor, you have raised a very thought-provoking, topic, or maybe continued with Professor Bhawuk, that journal-to-journal publication. So, my question is that how do we satiate our curiosity, and at the same time we make a mark or survive as an individual and as an institution also, because there are pressures, for example, career progression, and not only as an individual. I mean, how do we address this issue as an academic fraternity? Not only an individual is looking for these publications, but institutions are also looking for these publications because they actually help them in NIRF ranking and all. And given the context, management education context we are in, these rankings have become very, very important, at least in last few years. So I'm sure we would not be able to kind of solve this, trade-off. But any quick thoughts if you have, or Professor Bhawuk or anyone?
So I will kind of, since I have written 2 different papers for decision, the IIM Calcutta journal, one on the sort of the tragedy of ranking of business schools, and 10 years later on the tragedy of accreditation. And sorry to say, IIM Calcutta bend is about that they are accredited by 3 different agencies, each of them, I think, damaging management education in India at its own level. So it's for the top management to get the act together and sort of not put a straitjacket to what management knowledge is, such that doctoral students or young scholars, they can hang on to the curiosity and pursue that curiosity. So in a joke, I tell my students here that Rajinikanth should not be ashamed that none of his movies are going to get the Academy Award. He's making fantastic movies. His people love it. They worship him. He'll be happy. So we have to create an environment where pure curiosity is cherished. People have, and that's, sorry, Anupama, by just looking at it, maybe you are not in administrative positions. I have had the opportunity to be in my own institution. I kind of will take credit for not letting IMB go down the path of ASESB. Now whether now it will go or not, I don't know. EQUIS is one enough, because any partnerships internationally they want one international accreditation. I made an argument when I was in a position to influence that EQUIS is good enough. We don't need to go and sort of get hammered by somebody who has no clue about what is happening in India, telling us what to teach, etc. So some senior folks need to speak up more and not sort of, again, I have been lucky, and some of my other colleagues have been lucky that, while there was conversations about American management imitating the West, we really did not experience too much pressure in the younger days of our career. Now young scholars are being put into this straitjacket, and they are sort of, I think, suffering because the top management wants to sort of imitate the West, and whereas on the ground level, the scholars are interested in topics which are closer to the heart, closer to the experience, closer to the real lived experiences of people. But so don't lose heart. Yep. Some of us have to keep saying these.
I'll add, I'll say ditto to what Ojhaji said. And Anupmaji, when I was an assistant professor, I said I'm a 2nd generation cross-cultural psychologist, and I don't apologize for doing cross-cultural work. I have now become an indigenous researcher. That not apologizing has continued all my life. So I would simply say you are not that unfortunate. You have people like Dr. Oza and myself and Ashish and Rajan sir and others who will evaluate you. And if your work is not good, we will say so. So we are not saying because you attended this seminar, we'll say Anupmaji's work is wonderful. If we think your work is not of quality, we'll say so. But we will not use Western parameters to evaluate you. I had a colleague who is no more. He said he could read everything published in Econometrica in the 60s, and today he could not even understand what was happening in Econometrica. Had he become irrelevant? No. I mean, the disciplines evolve the way they do, and we have to make the best of it. So Ashish says beautifully, 2 of his students are working, they have a job, they are raising family. So you don't really need to panic. You are in India. We are not going to ask you to become Angrez. So I think there is pressure, but you can go around it. And if you are productive, I don't see any problem.
Actually, the problem is not of the young scholars not doing it. The problem is not enough PhD guides having courage to guide the students.
Absolutely.
Yeah, true.
And my students, one of my students did indigenous management, and he used Amar Chitrakatha to analyze it. He got a degree from University of Hawaii. And if you can't do that in India, there's something wrong with you. And this is the point. Good quality work does not depend on Western theories only.
Sure. Thank you, professors.
Best wishes.
Professor Srinivas has a comment.
Thank you, Ramya. I just wanted to briefly add, I think Anupama, you raised the question. I'm an associate editor in 2 journals, and both are in the West, though they do have people on the editorial board who are based in India and in other parts of the South. Very briefly, all journal publication is a conversation. The question really is who you're having the conversation with and how much it is worth. The latter has been exhaustively discussed already by my colleagues, but the former is worth posing. Who do you want to have the conversation with, and on what topics? As you know, Professor Bhawuk was mentioning, it is actually possible to find people interested in your topic, if it's Amar Chitrakatha, and to publish on it. It's really a question of finding who that audience is. The reason in India we're facing accreditation pressures is rather obvious. The IIMs have become so-called autonomous, and the Indian government is therefore finding different ways to pressure the IIMs to demonstrate that they're actually meeting standards of excellence. I use the phrase standards of excellence ironically in quotes. This isn't unusual to India. If you look across the world today, universities are in crisis. Some call it an audit culture. I'm not defending it, but I think it's worth recognizing that since this is a phenomenon happening across the world, wherever we are, we'll have to find ways to adjust to it. One easy way to adjust to it is to put it very simply, to make friends, to talk to people who appreciate your ideas, who agree with it, and who therefore will support you when you wish to publish on them. It's unfortunate the Indian government pressures accreditation and pressures publication in US journals, but the United States is, whether Americans like it or not, an extremely diverse country. And so, there are people who will support your ideas if you seek them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So if there are no further questions or comments,
I thought Rajanji had his hand up. Did he get to say?
No, but I did call upon him earlier, so I thought it was by mistake or something like that. But Dr. Gupta, are you there?
Yes. I'm very much there. I was waiting.
See, I told you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Professor Bhawukji. I want to bring back one major thing which this symposium had announced, and which has been sidetracked in the fight between the monkeys and the cat.
One monkey, 2 cats.
Yeah, and I think the way I knew, the cat took everything away because monkeys kept on fighting.
Okay, ulta. Anyway,
Ulta, the other way.
So anyway, what this was a new term for me, but I found it very meaningful. The term is multiversalism, which is neither universalism nor getting hooked to indigeneity. And I don't know where it came from. I realized, as they say, I was a poet and didn't know it. So I feel I have been practicing multiversalism for last 33 years. So I just want to say a word because I think this discussion has got polarized. And I think it is not good, in my view, for the mankind or humankind. As I said earlier, I have had my best American education in India, but I also had been lucky to be reading Sri Aurobindo. I don't know Sanskrit, so I had to rely on Sri Aurobindo, who wrote originally in English. I didn't have to read a translation. And I also had a mystical experience while reading him. So, which kind of has given me a kind of a deep conviction in Vedic tradition. However, it has not made me leave what I learned in IIT Kanpur and in IIM Ahmedabad. And when I have read multiple Western scholars, including Frederick Taylor, I'm sure many people will be surprised to know in this forum that American management, they took the name scientific management. Actually, Taylor did not like that label. And actually, what we call Taylorism today is a gross injustice to Frederick Taylor. Similarly, we talk of Weber. Weber has also been misused by management scholars in the West. So what I'm saying is, my position is this: multiversalism. We, perhaps as per the latest available history of mankind, we are all part of one family, starting from East Africa, Southeast Africa. However, we have settled in different parts on this planet, and we have developed different ways of life called culture. We have developed different languages. We have developed different ways of coping with contextual realities. Management is all about dealing with contextual realities. So, which leads to me to say, as a general conclusion, that every culture, every language holds some very precious nuggets of which belong to the mankind in general. So, I think every culture has a place in a global dialogue on what is the right way to do things. That is what management is all about. The second thing is that how do we learn from each other? I think that is where this polarization actually reduces the chances of learning from each other. I consider myself a child of at least two cultures. One culture which I got in my family, and of course, which was much later. After rejecting that, I became an atheist. I rejected. I still don't believe in God. I believe in consciousness, pure consciousness. I don't believe in God. So when it came to my understanding of management in India, I took two perspectives. One was the ideals which have been upheld by my Vedic tradition as a source of ideas. And the other is what I see around me and what inspiration can I draw from that. So when I worked with different PhD scholars, depending on the intrinsic nature, what we call in Vedic tradition Swabhava, Swadharma, each scholar, some scholars were inclined towards taking constructs from scriptures and trying to understand their implications for management today. There were other scholars who were not so inclined. Them I encouraged to go into the field. Much earlier I was fascinated by grounded theory by Glasser and Strauss long back in 60s. That was a way for every culture, it does not impose any conceptualization on reality. Concepts emerge from ground up. So that's what, when I was giving my talk today, I said I left out theory. I could not talk about theory. I could talk about problem because that is itself a big challenge amongst Indian scholars. And the second is the theory. So if I had time, I would have talked a lot more about how do we choose theories, where do they come from, and I have always told my scholars, if your question is worth asking, neither the existing theories nor the existing methods can be the constraint. You start the problem, go ground up, discover, either find a relevant theory in the existing theories or develop your own theory. And if the current methods are not appropriate, invent a method. And that is what my students have done. I feel so proud of them. And they're doing so well all over the place. It is possible. And this is what I submit. Pluri-versalism is possible here and now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just one comment on Prof. what Rajen said, just to make things a little fun. Scientific management is based on fake data, okay? Retd Taylor admitted that in court. In a court of law, he admitted that he had faked his data. So, let me say, Weber, you mentioned, Weber based his theorization, at least on India, not on Europe, on India, on really horrendous data based on the measurement of the head and the width of the nose, etc., produced by Risley. So both the scholars you mentioned, who we accept so easily, their theorization on India has been based on contaminated data. One, Retd Taylor, admittedly, he faked his data. And Weber theorized on India based on Risley's data, which is, if you go and ask an anthropologist today, will you stand by Risley's release, they will throw it out. Okay? So we should be very careful, just because of the heritage somewhere, Weber, or Retd Taylor. I mean, the foundations of these knowledge are very questionable. Okay, at least we should start questioning. Now, replacing it is the second part, and that's where Philippines can do what Philippines wants, Bangladesh can do what Bangladesh wants. I mean, maybe Tamil Nadu can do what Tamil Nadu wants, and Bihar will do what Bihar wants. But pushing back this universal stuff, and these two instances are on fake data. So, I mean, there's a long way to go.
And Mithila can do what Mithila wants, just to include Vidyaji.
हाँ, बिहार को ब्रेकअप कर दो, उसको मिथिला कर दो।
नहीं, बिहार को खा जाओ, make it part of Mithila. Why are you breaking it up? Bihar is new, Mithila is old. I go with Mithila.
Professor Benito, would you like to have any concluding remarks? Otherwise, we can wind up for today with Professor Benito. Are you there?
Yes, I am here, Ramya. Can you hear me?
Yes. Would you like to say something?
Yes.
Otherwise,
well, first of all, I've thoroughly enjoyed this smorgasbord of Indian intellectual discourse. I feel so privileged. My perspective on the matter is I try to ground management in terms of our national aspirations for our people. And I'm convinced that management is a powerful force for improving the quality of life of people, of communities. However, a lot of this tends to be lost in much of what we consider management research or even management practice. So I think this conversation about indigenous management is intimately tied to what we aspire for our people. And I think if that can be a guiding star, sort of, maybe it can help bring us to a place where we continuously learn from each other, because ultimately we are one humanity, and I think management can be part of leading us to that ideal future. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Last, I'm just going to request Professor Srinivas. We are way beyond time, but this is a very, very engaging discussion that's happening. Dr. Srinivas.
Ramya, thank you. I'll keep this very, very short. I just want to briefly respond to what Professor Gupta raised and Aboy's response to it. One way to understand Frederick Taylor and Weber is perhaps not in the entirely pessimistic way that Professor Oja shares. It is rather to see it in the following way. Taylor built his theories on the context of practicing workers. Professor Oja is absolutely right that he was taken to court and that he recanted that some of the data he had shared, but he never argued that that his ideas were his own. He did assure everyone the ideas were based on workers. There were workers doing differentiation, and he took those ideas and codified it, and it eventually got named as scientific management. Weber's ideas on India were a complete mistake, were based on faulty information, as Aboy shares, and frankly, on racist ideas. However, Weber's ideas also led to Prussia in modernizing its army and led to the creation of bureaucracies within the Prussian state and within the French state, and led to what today we would call as the beginning of the government ministries and so forth. So to put it another way, there is a connection here between ideas and context. Contexts breed ideas, ideas shape contexts. The context bred Taylor's ideas, just like Weber's ideas shaped contexts. And unless we recognize that interplay, we're not going to get very far in tackling only one rather than both. That's my view. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure listening to all of you. Thank you very much for this opportunity.